Hi, I'm Jeff Chatterton. I am a crisis communications expert and the author of the best-selling book, Leaders Under Fire. On today's show with Dove, we're going to talk about the fact that there are only 3 types of crisis, and you're probably preparing for the wrong one. We're going to look at the phenomenon known as newsjacking. Does the media really matter? We're going to take a look at how a crisis done well can increase your bottom line by up to 30%. There's all sorts of really great content. There are things that your audience are really going to need from you in a crisis, and chances are good you're setting yourself up for the wrong thing. Find out what that thing is and more coming up in today's show.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives. Hey, would you do me a quick favor? Send me a note, DM me, tell us where, you can do it on any of the 4 big social media outlets, but tell us where you listen to the podcast on. Where do you listen to us? Is it Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio? Wherever it is for you, what is the app? Tell us your favorite episode. Tell us an episode you've listened to that you just loved, because I'm going to pick a random winner from all the people who write to me and tell me those questions. Where are you listening to it? And what is your favorite episode and why? Tell us one of those and you could be in for the prize. So what would you need to do to up-level your leadership? Well, let's start here. I don't know if you've noticed, but we seem to be living in a state of perpetual crisis, from pandemic to supply chain issues, from talent leaving the workforce in the millions. Then on top of that, there's this thing called the cancel culture. Say the wrong thing, even in a joke, even in your past, in your career, your status, say, well, it could be gone in a moment. How is your organization going to not just cope with crisis, but come out on top? Well, stay tuned, because that's where we're going on today's show. I am your host, Dov Baron. I'm here to assist you, tapping into the one thing in your business that changes everything by transforming meaning into action. Curious to know more? Simply go to dovbaron.com. That's DOVBARON.com. This episode of Leadership and Loyalty is brought to you in part by our other podcast, Curiosity Bites. Curiosity Bites is the answer to the question, how do we bring people together who completely disagree? This is exactly what your heart, your soul, and your mind has been craving. It's your chance to sit in on some real, often intense conversations with some of the world's most interesting people. We're talking about holy people, quantum physicists, neuroscientists, philosophers, astronauts, skeptics, Grammy award-winning entertainers, and a whole lot of other people. It's just amazing. I think you'll find it truly fascinating. Simply go to dovbaron.com and find out how you can sign up for and sink your teeth into the delicious Curiosity Bites. As always, you can find both of our shows on all the usual podcast outlets, as I said before, wherever you tune into them. And we always need your help in staying relevant. So please get over there and do us a favor, rate, review, and subscribe to the show. It really helps us. And if you are a regular listener, big thank you to you for making us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners. We are honored and grateful to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. So again, thank you for making our show the #1 show, and thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. All right, let's strip it down and dive right in. Warren Buffett once said, an idiot with a plan can beat a genius with no plan. But in the context of crisis, is that true? After all, as Mike Tyson said, everyone has a plan until they're punched in the face. So if Buffett is right, you should have a crisis communication plan. However, if Tyson is correct, your plan will be about as useful as an ashtray and a motorcycle. So what's the answer? Well, we're about to find out. My guest today is Jeff Chatterton. He is the guy you want in the room when everyone else is having a panic attack. He's a best-selling author, an expert in communication crisis. He has worked on projects from Sydney to Stockholm and everywhere in between. He's here to peel back the curtain on the dark arts of communicating a crisis, because it turns out what most business leaders have been told for decades about dealing with a crisis is very, very wrong. Jeff is a specialist, as I said, in the in crisis communication. He's also the co-author of Leaders Under Fire, the CEO's survival guide to navigating corporate crisis. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and help me to welcome Mr. Jeffrey Chipstead.
I easily the best intro ever. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. So, where we always like to start the show is in the context of leadership and leadership development. What is the question that we should be asking, particularly, in these times, that we're just not, that maybe we're misdirecting ourselves away from it, and we really should be asking? What is the question we should be asking?
I'm a crisis guy, and so I don't feel prepared to talk about, supply chain problems or anything. I will tell you, when it comes to crisis, the problem that gets asked that shouldn't be asked is, how can we make this go away? Right. And we don't want to make the problems go away. The problems are going to be there no matter what you do, no matter whether your successor is there, whether you're fired or not. The problems are always going to come up and hit you in the face. The question we should be asking is, how do we take advantage of this and actually use this to our advantage? And very few companies are in a position or in a mental frame of mind to think about, how do we actually take advantage of this crap storm that we're up to our gills in? Yeah.
So most people are really in a reactive space when the thing comes up, and that first reaction is, how do we get rid of this? How do we sweep it away? And you're saying, let's not sweep it away. Let's see how it can be advantageous.
100%. And I have long maintained and there's all sorts of old school thinking about, Chinese word for crisis is danger and opportunity. And there's different things like that. The fact is, if you're dealing with a problem, and you've got the attention of your audiences, and it doesn't matter whether that audience is your employees, whether it's your investors, whether it's the members of the public and the media at large, they're paying attention to you. You know how difficult it is to get people to pay attention to you in times of peace? I mean, people pay millions of dollars for Super Bowl ads just to try to get a little bit of, hey, look at me, hey, look at me. They're all looking at you right now. This is a golden opportunity. If you can actually prove that you can be trusted on the little things right here and now, then it does far more for.
So I want to underline that, because I think you just made a great point. So we're all out there screaming for attention. The feces hits the fan. We get all the attention, but we don't want it because we've labeled it bad. Mm-hmm. And what we need to do is see it as an opportunity to prove that we are integral, that we have great values, that we can manage situations, or whatever it is. It's an opportunity to show our cause, our meaning, our purpose, whatever it is. Am I right?
I think everyone gets all freaked out about the what, and that's the wrong question. It's the wrong problem. It doesn't matter what it is. The airplane has crashed. Someone has died at our facility. Our supply chain has completely collapsed, and everyone freaks out about the what. And frankly, the members of the public don't really care about the what. What they care about, what your audiences care about, is the why. The why and the how. And that's where CEOs lose their job, is they focus on the what and they forget about the why and the how, because it doesn't matter the what. Facts don't matter. In a crisis, facts are irrelevant. It's not about
emotion.
facts. It's about emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can prove to people that you are trustworthy, if you can prove to people that you're human, that you're empathetic, that you're doing the right thing in times of trouble, the fact that you got in a time of trouble is completely forgivable.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone, we're all human. That's not a challenge. It's what are you doing in order to prove that you can be trusted to fix the problem? That's a massive opportunity.
So can we take a real world case, because I want people to have a good grasp of this? So one of the things that you and I had talked about before was the airline that dragged the guy off. This was pre-pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
I think he was a Chinese doctor, I believe.
Yep.
And they dragged him off the plane.
Are we allowed to name names?
Huh?
Can we name names?
I don't care.
Yeah, it was United Airlines who dragged Dr. David Dow off a plane in Louisville, Kentucky, about 4 years ago.
So now we've got something that has the potential to seriously damage the company, but
Mm-hmm.
it's the behavior of potentially of an individual or individuals. So the what is somebody was dragged off. The why can be easily scapegoated onto the person who did it. If you're consulted on that, how do we deal with that?
So I remember that incident quite. I'm a United frequent flyer, so I used to joke that I get upgraded. It just means I get better weapons to defend myself. I remember when that happened, and the what was that they went in, they beat this guy up, they dragged him off the plane.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people, when I say people, the communicators, the executives at United think that the why is because he wasn't supposed to be there, because they had they according to their rules and criteria, for whatever reason, he was no longer entitled to that seat. And that doesn't work. What they needed to have done, and they did a pretty good job at the CEO level on through. They ran into some bigger problems, obviously, with the pandemic than any amount of beating people up could ever pale in comparison to. But the why in that case was because we screwed up. You know what? We've seen this, and wow, it is really obvious that we have experienced a breakdown in the way we communicate, in the way we handle this, and the way we resolve that conflict. Here's what we're going to do. Here is the training that we're going to go through. Here is the apology that we have issued to Dr. Dow. You know what? This should never have happened. And here's what we're going to do in order to make sure that people know that it won't happen to them.
So the simplicity of it, and forgive me for simplifying, but the simplicity of it is absolute accountability and absolute transparency.
And accountability and transparency is like a conduit, but at the end of it, it has to be a conduit to something. And if it's a conduit, if it's a conduit to crap, you're going to get crap back. It's authentic, transparent crap. If it's a conduit to empathy, people understand that you know how they feel. And that is that's the secret sauce. They need to know that you're human, and that you know how they feel, and that they clearly feel betrayed and upset and scared. And then you are now a threat to them. That's where crisis communications is just basically threat management.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
So let's take this to something that is certainly in hyper awareness, particularly in the last 5 or 6, maybe a little bit longer years. There seems to be a lot of fragility these days, the potential to develop what I call foot in mouth disease
Mhm.
is high. Like I talked about at the beginning, people saying something 5 years ago, and it comes back on them. So let's start here. How do you define, you and your organization, how do you define crisis? Because my guess is um, it's defined differently by you than it would be by somebody in it at the time. I know you already said it's the opportunity to show who you really are, but when it comes up in a place like what I was saying about this political correctness and fragility, um, walk us through a little bit of trying to understand that, because sometimes there's a push pull, and meaning that I don't really feel like I got anything to apologize for, but this person's fragile, or this situation's fragile, or this,
Do you want two current real life examples that we're dealing
please,
with
yeah,
right now?
that would be
All
great.
right. So off the top of my head, and you're kind of throwing this at me, but I'm going to look at two different examples, and two different end results. So over in Las Vegas, the coach of the NFL team, the Las Vegas Raiders, used to be the Oakland Raiders, is now fired. John Gruden is no longer the coach of the Las Vegas Raiders because of comments he sent back and forth via email to a buddy of his over in the Washington Redskins organization 10 years earlier. So this is a private conversation he was having with a buddy of his that was 10 years ago. So he obviously got in the crap storm, and he got canceled.
Mhm.
Conversely, completely separate situation. You've got comedian Dave Chappelle issues a special on Netflix. The trans community gets absolutely frenetic about transphobia. A bunch of Netflix employees threaten to walk out. And now onus is on both Dave Chappelle and forgive me, whoever the president and CEO of Netflix is these days.
Right.
Reed Hastings is last I checked, but it could
Mhm.
be different. So the difference is, the the conduit of authenticity and transparency. A lot of those jokes that John Gruden were communicating with were racist in nature, or at least perceived to be racist, and if not racist, definitely sexist, and that's a problem when you're an NFL head coach.
Mhm.
It's not so much a problem if your job is to challenge people's thinking and to make them giggle.
Mhm.
And Dave Chappelle is probably going to get more Netflix shows maybe not Netflix, but Amazon Prime will snap him up, right? I mean, it's his brand. He's on brand.
Mhm.
He has offered to sit down and meet with members of the trans community, but he's also clear that he's not prepared to bend over backwards and change who he is.
Right.
And there is a big difference between being controversial, being the center of attention, and being in a crisis.
Yeah, I understand that, but at the same time, just to stay on this, because it is a hot subject, not necessarily Dave Chappelle, although that is very hot, but in the context of being punished for something that you may have evolved beyond.
Mhm.
It's very likely, right? So, Kevin Hart made gay jokes 11 years before he was supposed to host the Oscars. He has no problem with gay people. He likes gay people. He has friends who are gay people, and he's a comedian, but he got canceled from the Oscars and he apologized up and down and was very clear about apologizing and apologized. I think it was something like 20 times, and it still wasn't good enough. That's a crisis for a man who has a dream of hosting the Oscars, gets to do it, and is snapped up and punished for history. And I think that this is one of the things that I'm seeing. Like the guy you just talked about, I don't know him, the manager of that team, but I don't know if he's a completely different person than he was 10 years ago. I know I'm a different person than I was 10 years ago. So how do we manage that crisis when it's a crisis of whoever I is, who I was versus who I am.
Well, and I would caution you. Yeah, you know what? Kevin Hart lost the Oscars gig, but because of the way Kevin Hart responded, Kevin Hart is still going to have a very viable and strong career. And
Absolutely.
maybe he'll host the Oscars, maybe he won't. Life is full of unfortunate circumstances. People have house fires. That doesn't mean that they cease operating and they stop moving, right? People lose gigs all the time, and that's the very nature of business.
Yes.
It is what it is. How do you pick up, move on, and actually grow as a result of that, even though that wasn't in your game plan? And that's what Kevin Hart has the opportunity to do, and he's done a pretty decent job.
But I'm not talking about the mindset, because that's a different subject altogether. I understand he needs that mindset, and I understand he has that mindset, and I salute him for that. But we're talking about the crisis management of it in the context of the public, where oftentimes in those situations, there is a narrative about who you are, present tense, that is in the context of who you were, past tense, laid over on who you are. And that's what I'm talking about as the crisis management, not as the mindset. Because I get the mindset. Great. Okay. I agree. And I think Kevin Hart handled it very well from that point of view. He talked about how he was really upset and really disappointed, but he's moving on. Okay. Chappelle, exactly the same as you said,
Yep.
And when, for me, we're living in an Orwellian world when comedians are not allowed to be funny, but that's another point altogether.
We could have a whole other sidebar conversation on that. Yeah.
So in that context of just dealing with the crisis, quote unquote, of that moment, what's your guidance around that in dealing with, okay, Kevin Hart brought you in and says, okay, how do I talk to these people? How do we deal with this?
Well, and I think what is your ultimate goal here? Your goal here isn't necessarily to get the Oscar gig back. That's unfortunate, but that is what it is. That is a what thing. That's like I said, people lose clients, people lose opportunities all the time. Your goal as a comedian in crisis, there's a whole client industry I've never tried to pick up on yet now, right? Comedians in crisis. I probably check the URL. I bet that's available. Your goal as a comedian in crisis, as a CEO in crisis, as any sort of corporate leader in crisis right now, is to make sure that the people who are paying attention to you understand that is the what, that is what has happened in the past. Absolutely. But the why, and this is the important part here, the why is because you were a different person back then, and that you have evolved, and that you have grown, and this is how you've grown, and this is why you can prove it and show it. When people do that, they may be upset, absolutely, but at the end of the day, they're going to understand, Dove said some pretty dumb things 10 years ago, but he, good on him for recognizing that he said some pretty dumb things. And I mean, for heaven's sake, is there anyone alive who can't, look back at 10 year ago Jeff or 10 year ago Dove and go, oh my gosh, I was an incredibly stupid kid?
I can think of somebody who wouldn't do that, but we won't go down that political conversation.
Well, yeah, okay, yeah, touche, yeah.
Okay, but let's take this a little bit further, because even as people are listening right now, they might assume that, okay, well, is this media training, or is this crisis communication? And you make a clear distinction between those two. So let's have people understand that.
Yeah, it's a huge difference. Media training is important. It's great. It's a skill set that's, heck, I teach it. But it does things like how to appear on camera, how to issue a soundbite, how to shape your messages in a way that is succinct and brief and answers the questions that you want to answer. Crisis communications training is a much more dynamic. The goal is a whole lot more profound. It's a lot more existential. How do I get people to trust me, even though there is this absolute crap storm going on, right? How do I get people to lend me credibility? What can I do to show empathy right now? And it becomes a much more of a leadership exercise, a leadership skills development point. When we do crisis communications training, we still put them on camera, but it's more as a training tool so they can see what they look like, because body language is so critically important when you're communicating with people. They need to be able to see that. And sometimes they overlap. When you are doing a media scrum in the middle of a crisis, it's the best of both worlds, or the worst of both worlds, depending on your perspective.
Right.
But they're very different. We're not, you know what? I don't really care so much whether you're wearing spots or stripes. I don't really care whether or not you have the lighting set up properly, all of those sorts of things. I want to know, when people look at this guy and they ask him the really awkward, tough question that I know you're dreading, do you have a way of owning that, accepting your role, but more importantly, proving why you should be trusted in the future?
Can you share with us, as we're already coming towards the end of the first section here of our part one and part two, of 2 parts. Can you share with us a story of, and again, I don't know how much you can share because of privacy issues, but can you share with us an example of a crisis that you have walked a company, a person, an individual through?
Oh,
and how they had to deal with it?
Oh, and I have a bunch. We went through one of the opening stories in Leaders Under Fire was the story of Nigel. I got a phone call. By the way, Nigel is not his real name. I'm pretty clear. The stories are accurate, but some of the details have been changed because that's what people pay me for, is to keep them out of the news and public eye. But I got a phone call. I was sitting at my desk, and it was a client of mine who said, "Hey, you're going to get a phone call. I vouch for this guy. He's legit. He's good. But he's in trouble." And I'm like, "Yeah, okay, send him over." So 1 p.m. or so, I get a phone call from Nigel. He owned a specialty aviation company, which is about all I can say about that. Fine. And they had gone down, and 2 people had died. A number were in hospital. They were in big time trouble. They were attracting international headlines from all over the world. He was in Britain. I was in Canada. The aircraft was in Africa. It's like, all right, here's what you're going to say right now. Here's what you're going to do. Here's what we're going to do for the next 12 hours. And can you meet me in Nairobi? And we got to work. And we made the decision fairly early on that what was far more important was not the media. It was not necessarily a lot of the traditional stakeholders, but it was all of the members of the tourism community who were like, should we send our safari guests with you? Right. That's this is a huge problem. I mean, by the time I landed, they were effectively bankrupt. Most of their major wholesale providers had pulled all of their business with them. They were like, we don't know if we can trust you or not. So we got to work. We put together a campaign where Nigel reached out directly to a list of priority stakeholders that we announced what had gone wrong, what we knew, what we didn't know, which is probably far more important than admitting what we
Sure.
know is what we don't know yet, but where you
Mhm.
could go for more information. Um, and at that point, we become the trusted communicator. We become the conduit. And we kind of take over from the media in the eyes of our most important audiences.
So it's leaning forward rather than back.
Absolutely sucked right into it. Then over the next 2 or 3 weeks, did a really powerful, hey, here's what we've done, here's what is different, here are the changes that we have made. Didn't admit to any liability that wasn't inherently obvious. Like,
Mhm.
obviously it's our aircraft and that aircraft is no longer in the sky. There's certainly an amount of liability there, but we were very clear. This is what we're done. This is what we, here's what we can, this is what we understand, but everything else like that.
Mhm.
And at the end of the day, not only did we keep the book of business, they continued to say, all right, you know what, obviously that's a really unfortunate situation, but we understand unfortunate things happen. So I ran into Nigel at a tourism conference 2 years later, and bumped into him and bought him a beer, said, hey, how is business? Like, what's going on? Did you ever get back to where you were? And he looks at me and he shakes his head. He goes, no. And I went, oh, okay. Like, how far are you down? Right. And he goes, no, you misunderstand me. We're not down. We're up by a third. So they have grown their business from $6 million to $9 million a year. It's a small aviation company,
Sure.
but because of the way they handled that event, people were like, I didn't even know you could take an aircraft over that part of the world. I didn't know that was an option. Yeah, this is what we do. It was an international attention getting event. You can't duplicate that. The next time you need to grow your business by a third, you can't
You're
kill
not
two
looking
of
to
your
crash a
passengers.
plane. No, of course
Yeah,
not.
no, it's not it's not a good idea.
No.
But the bad stuff happens.
Right.
Bad things. I don't care how good you are at maintenance. I don't care how good you are at all of the other stuff. And that's why it's, you know what, you need the plans to handle the logistics and the operations and the maintenance and all that stuff. But no plan on earth is going to be able to dynamically adjust your communications approach like that.
Yeah.
And as a result, they grew their business by a third. They're one of the fastest growing aviation companies in that part of the world right now.
Fabulous. Okay, Jeff, we're already at the end of our first half of the two-part show. This is a fascinating conversation. I'd love people to know more about you, find out more about you, about your book, and about all the resources that you offer. Could you tell people where they can find out more about you and the book and those kinds of things?
So the easiest way to do any of that would be if you go to leadersunderfire.com. We'll send you a copy of the book for free. It sells all day long for $19.99 on Amazon. We'll send you, we're going to ask for a couple bucks just to handle the printing and the shipping and the postage costs and that kind of stuff. But other than that, we'll send you a copy for free. We'll, if you're not careful, we'll probably put you on our email list as well. But there's
okay. So leadersunderfire.com, you can find out more about Jeff, you can find out more about the book, and you can even get your own copy of the book. So of course we'll post all of the links to Jeff and to his company in the show notes, so you'll be able to get them there. We're going to be back in just a click with more from Jeff, and we're going to be talking more about really what does it mean to confront crisis, and we're also going to talk a little bit about what are the wrong things to do, including how to piss off reporters in a way that won't work for you and what you could do instead. So stay tuned, stay curious, and we'll be back in just a click.